So I'm going to start by talking about a little bit about MagCulture, fleshing out what Brynda was discussing. I studied as a graphic designer, so my background is design. We still have a design studio at MagCulture. We do the online journal where we try and publish at least one post a day covering events and reviews and news around the magazine world, both in the UK and internationally. And then the most recent addition to the setup was the shop, which is a full 400 square feet of retail space, which we'll have a look at shortly. So these are the primary activities. I also do a lot of design consultancy with publishers. I write for other people, for the creative press, and we hold events both in the shop and, as Brynda said again, we do an annual conference. What holds all these elements together is that we love magazines, and that's a very easy thing to say, and I'm sure it's, there's plenty of people in this room who would find time to agree with that. But I genuinely do have a passion for magazines it goes beyond just a nostalgia for a time when I first started in the business, but coming from the design point of view, I believe magazines are the root of all graphic design. It's where text and image came together and graphic design came about in the early 20th century. I just want to unpack that phrase a little further and look at the we. So we at MagCulture, it's a very small we. There's not many of us. It's a small team. People are sometimes surprised how small. It probably adds up to about 4.5 people, given that 3 of them are part-time. That's the team itself, but beyond that, there is a broader set of people. One of the reasons I opened the shop was to create a kind of focal point for the booming independent magazine scene in London and Europe and the world. And so the we is bigger than just us, but it's nonetheless the core team that runs MagCulture is a very small team. And the love, well, I explained a little bit there where I'm coming from on that in terms of seeing it as a very lively, innovative, if anything, the many challenges that this industry faces has created a creative opportunity. And in a sense, when it was when the business model was less broken, if you like, it was more there was more at risk if you were to try things. I think now all bets are off, and it's more likely to have a go at doing something, and therefore, from a creative standpoint, things are very exciting. And then magazines. Well, magazines. I'm very open on what a magazine is, and in my earlier breakout session, went through some of the examples of magazines that perhaps some people wouldn't even think of as a magazine. But as far as I'm concerned, a magazine is something that just happens on a repeat. There's an issue 1, 2, 3. That might be, and indeed used to be, weekly and monthly. I've known people try and do daily, but realistically now that we're seeing more and more magazines that are quarterly or biannual, annual. I don't see why they can't happen every decade if that's what it takes. And I also don't see why it has to be a bunch of pages stapled down the left-hand side, roughly A4 side in colour. It can be whatever form. Some things can be objects. There's a fantastic project just on the west coast, San Francisco, called Pop-Up Magazine, which is it's a live event that the editors prepare and put together and deliver a live show in a theatre that they regard as a magazine. And one of the clever things they do with that is they don't allow recording or videoing or anything. So the only way you experience that magazine is to be in the auditorium that night. Now, I did say this wasn't an exercise in nostalgia, but I'm going to indulge a quick bit of nostalgia just to make a point. The first magazine that grabbed me was the New Musical Express. And this is particularly poignant because earlier this week, after 66 years, it was announced that it was closing. The New Musical Express was a weekly tabloid newspaper, primarily black and white, pre-computer, way back. I mean, this particular edition is from 1978. Very simple in technology and design, but absolutely vital to me in terms of my social life at the weekend when I was a teenager. And this was how it's from the interviews, from the adverts that I ran my social life. So as far as I'm concerned, this was my Facebook, my social media at the time. But then sometimes if I went to the store on a Thursday morning, they would have run out of the NME, and I would have to rely on this other magazine called Sounds, which is exactly the same. I mean, if I put the two of them together, you'd think, well, what's the difference? And indeed, what was the difference? Black and white, tabloid, they made your fingers dirty. If you're lucky, they had a bit of red on the cover. But what the difference was the character of the two magazines, the editorial stance, the nature of the writing, the position they took on things. It has the same content, the same stories. Not that much happened on a weekly basis. So they all covered the same thing, but I felt more attuned to, more happy with NME than with Sounds. And that, I didn't realise it at the time, but looking back, that absolutely fashioned so much of what I believe in terms of magazines, that magazines have character, that magazines are effectively people in the mode of their editor and their editorial team. I mentioned I trained as a graphic designer. I'm not going to, in this presentation, look at my graphic design. I'm going to look at the parallel career I've carved where I'm commentating and looking at magazines. Just briefly before I get to the core of the talk. The name MagCulture first appeared on a book in 2003 there, and this was a compilation of a collection of magazines that I'd seen and my fascination with the way that they portrayed and reflected the society and culture in which they landed. They weren't just British magazines, they were European and from further afield. Back then, much less globally connected world, it was a case of going on holiday and collecting these things. The Modern Magazine was a more recent project, which was more essay-orientated, but still had a lot of visual input in terms of current magazines following similar similar vein as MagCulture. Independence was a series of interviews that I did, and this was very deliberately non-pictorial. It's a series of interviews with independent magazine makers, some of whose magazines I'm going to talk about now. The book, Modern Magazine, led to an annual conference. It wasn't intended to be an annual conference, but the Modern Magazine 2013 was the launch of the book, and it was successful enough that subsequently we've done it every year. So last November we did the 5th one, to which we attracted about 300 attendees who came to hear from small magazines like Migrant Journal, more of whom later, and big magazines like The New Yorker. This is a very important part of what we do at MagCulture. Whilst today I'm going to be talking to you about the independent scene and the small independent niche magazines that can, I believe, tell us so much about the state of publishing today. It's by no means the case that just because a magazine's small and independent, that it's going to be a great magazine. There are many magazines set up in such a manner that are very, very poor. It's just what I'm interested in, what we're interested in MagCulture, is good magazines, innovative magazines, and there are great examples in the mainstream, New Yorker being one, and as well as not so great examples, and it's the same with the independent scene. And the same goes for the website, and this is just a recent grab. So on the top left hand there, you've got a new magazine from Athens about Greek food, which had just launched. That was their first issue. We reviewed that. And the bottom right, we had a look at the Olympics edition of the New York Times magazine. So we opened the shop. We stock a lot of magazines. The whole idea behind this is to try have, we design-wise, and when we're sort of inputting into making magazines, we try and do the best for the magazines concerned, and it's the same in terms of the shop. We want to make a really great retail experience for magazines, and I think if there's been problems in the industry in terms of making magazines and some of the qualitative issues around that as corners get cut in production, I think the same has happened in the retail trade, certainly in the UK, where magazines get pushed more and more to the back of stores in favour of cold drinks and snacks. So we wanted to create just a far more gallery-like, peaceful situation where people can look at these magazines. We encourage people to browse. And some people will come in and they will spend an hour and a half looking through magazines, and you're sort of thinking, oh, well, they're going to walk out without buying anything, but they've looked at a lot, and then they go back and they pick out the 7, 8, 9, 10 magazines that they've selected from their range as they've been going around the store. We hold events on a monthly basis. We get editors in, and often the next one will be the editor of Flaneur coming over from Berlin, so we're able to call on Europe and get people from abroad to come and introduce their new issue. We get a young, involved crowd come along. But the heart of the shop is, the heart of what we're doing right now is this big shelf full of magazines. And these magazines primarily are the independent magazines. They are primarily from the UK, but not exclusively, probably about 30-40% of London and the UK, another 20 or 30% from the rest of Europe, and then the remainder from all around the world. We do have a few from Canada, we have them from the States, we have them from the obvious kind of English-speaking territories, but there's an increasing number coming from the Far East, and like much of Europe, even though there are local languages, everyone defaults to English, and there seems to be just very much like the language itself. This seems to be the language which is allowing these magazines to build international markets by they publish in English and then they can sell into multiple territories. They cover all subjects. There are people often ask, so where's the gaps? Where, if I wanted to launch my own independent magazine, where is there the gap? There are gaps, but they're secret. But they cover everything you would expect at the moment. They do. Lots of the magazines are reinventing categories. They're looking at from food, sports, all sorts of particular sports, as well as sports in a generic sense. Art, the more obvious creative endeavours, art, design, architecture, fashion. There's children's magazines. There's all the traditional kind of tropes, all the genres of magazines that we know that have traditionally existed are remade in the form of these independents. But there are also some very interesting magazines that are more conceptual, and we'll be having a look in when I come to look at some specific examples shortly. There's some very interesting magazines that take on a sort of new idea of what a magazine can be. This is a line from an art director that really engages me in terms of what we should expect from magazines. They should be full of surprises and they should explode. They should surprise you. And I think one of the things generally we can learn from independent publishers is that idea that you can do things your way, that you can surprise people in a way. And for me, making magazines is always about balances between one side and the other in terms of various kind of situations. And this is a case in point. The difference, the possibilities between familiarity and change are there to be played with and tinkered with as far as I'm concerned. I think it's very easy, especially from the point of view of someone making magazines, to get into a habit, to get into a template, both literally on the page in terms of structure, but also in terms of flat plan and in terms of scheduling. Just by dint of the fact that you have to get the thing done, you can often get bound into a way of working, and I think it's important to break out of that. I think we have to get the things done, and it has to go to print, and it has to be done on time, and budget, etc. But also I think it's important to stick a spanner in the works and change things and make things explode when you can. So let's look at some independent magazines. I'm going to go through 10 examples one by one in some detail and try and draw something out from each of these 10. I haven't paid any attention in terms of whether they're from one country or two countries. I've just taken 10 what I think of as strong examples from the scene with a point to be made around them. I think the other thing to make, the other thing which I'll try and address as I go through is that there is a danger or a possibility that when I sort of say independent magazines, that we all think of one type of thing. That we might not even agree what that one type of thing is, but most of these magazines have lots in common, but they also have lots of differences between them. And often that difference might be in terms of sales success and in terms of how far advanced they are as businesses. Some of these magazines I'm going to share with you are already very successful businesses, and I think it's important to remember that, because there are a lot of small independent magazines, some of which I'm going to show you, which are hobbies. Effectively, they are labours of love and passion that are made at the weekend or after hours or during free time. Nothing wrong with that. They lead to some fantastic work, but sometimes projects exist in that space, and that's the extent of their ambition. Other magazines go forward and they become significantly successful businesses in their own right, to the point where the idea that you can split easily the line between being a small independent and being a big mainstream title, it's beginning to blur a bit. So I'm going to go straight in with Identity. I'm going to look at it's a combined English-Dutch magazine called The Gentlewoman. has a very, very strong visual and editorial identity, as shown by this selection of front covers. And if we just go, I mean, this is a woman's magazine. If we just go to the other extreme in terms of the magazines that the Gentlewoman isn't, and then bring back the Gentlewoman, we begin to see the clear identity that it has. It's still more often than not celebrity orientated, like the weeklies in the background there. It's still using the power of celebrity. It's very, very has a very, very clear understanding of its position and its self-knowledge about who they're aiming at, and they use women as a role model to demonstrate what the Gentlewoman can be, what the Gentlewoman is. This is the current issue. They're very excited, of course, because Alison Janney has just won multiple awards, including the Oscar for her I, Tonya movie. But here we have, we can talk about the kind of rules of making a front cover, but then this ticks an awful lot of them, even though it's very stark and plain and has a very strict modernist design approach. It's very clear what the name of the magazine is. There's a celebrity photograph. It's the woman who is meant to represent the person that is buying the magazine. There is eye contact, and there's a lot being said there, even though it's very, very simple and plain. The magazine itself has a very structured environment. It's divided into 3 sections, and they always address those sections very clearly. So in this issue, it's A, B, and C, very clearly delineated, partly as for their own identity, but partly, as you can see on the left, to keep them clear from advertising. They also have a very brave point of view. Here we have the end of an article on the left-hand page, and a lot of most magazines will work late into the evening to fill that column of space at the end of that page there. Something that I've felt for a long time, and it's very interesting for me in terms of the relationship between magazines and newspapers, is that a newspaper has to be full every day, and I always wondered, how do they always get just the right number of stories? But of course they don't. They just carry on working until they fill it. And I think there's a point at which it's something pretty refreshing, and it's their identity. It allows them to just carry on until they think, okay, that's the end of the piece, we'll just end it. And there's half a column empty. This goes even further in the beginning section of the magazine, where they have this very, they're always changing these templates slightly, but in this case, they have the title of this column in the middle. It's about consent, about sexual consent. And it just sits in the middle, and the text flows around it, and the space is the space, and it's very calm, it's very measured, it's very designed. Same here. But it gives a very, very strong identity, and this carries on through. So in this case, they're centering those titles on the page. There's an interview with the fashion designer Catherine Hamnett, and again, in the middle of the picture, we have her name picked out in red. The text is all there in very clear elements. It's very serious, very modern, Swiss modernist, again, centered. Then we come to our cover feature, and here we have the identity very strongly presented. It's first name terms here, and that's something they do constantly. So it's Alison is the thing. And again, even there with the introduction to the piece at the top there, there's probably some sub-editors in the room flinching at the idea that the word talent has hung over on its own at the end of the sentence. Yes, I can hear you. But they've just done it. This is what you needed to say, and we're saying it. They've got absolute confidence in their ability to do so. The same here with the interview with the young new media entrepreneur Tavi Gevinson. The intro runs across the top, and it does work across the fold, but there's no rhyme or reason as to why it ends when it ends. It runs until it ends. And then they have pages. The pages of text are very solid, but they have this on the right-hand page here. They break it up in a very conversational side, and this is what I love about this magazine: is it's a very, very structured, strong magazine that has, I hope it's clear, very clear identity, very strong visual design-led identity. But it's chatty, and this is what they're like, and it's the absolute visual encompassing of everything that this magazine, the people, everyone to do with it. So in the middle there, there's these little chatty pieces that come in. So there's a reference to Jerry Shandling in the piece, and there's a little kind of footnote with a picture of him from his TV show. Similarly here, there's a reference to a magazine, and that slots in as well. So this is kind of this balance between deadly seriousness and friendly, chatty, warm feeling. And then at the end, they observe there's an interview, as well as Alison Janney, there's an interview with Kim Deal, and it turns out they're both from the same city in Ohio. So at the end of the magazine, they gratuitously run a map and just point out this is where this town is. And I'm sure you all know this. Your geography of North America is spot on. I don't know. And this moves on into online. They didn't move online. They didn't do anything digitally for a long, long time. But they're now very active on Instagram. The stuff looks great on Instagram. And I mentioned chatty. So this is the art director on the left, Veronica Ditting, and the editor, Penny Martin. Penny in particular epitomizes the magazine. She is the great example of the editor who represents her magazine. And this is them at the MagCulture shop when they launched an issue a couple of years back, or a year back. And what they do for their launches is they have a club, they invite all their readers, as many can come. And what they have this really clever thing. They have the new issue. It's the first time you can pick up a new issue. You have to buy it, but you buy it and then you take it to them and they wrap it for you in special wrapping paper. So you, as a reader, as a member of the Gentlewoman Club, you have the opportunity to meet Penny and Veronica and have a chat as long as it takes for them to wrap up your copy, hand it to you, say thank you, off you go. And you've met the editor, you've had a little bit of experience, and there's no kind of awkwardness, or it's just a little bit of small talk, and you can go away feeling, I've met the editor. And it's a very, very clever technique. And that's completely belies the kind of what can sometimes be seen as quite a cold, clinical design on the page. The readers are accessed online as well. I do just want to, in case anyone's got any doubt as to the sort of fun and the wit that underlies this whole thing, this is their the running club, and this is the advert for the running club, and this is the staff from the magazine advertising their running club, and they all put their running gear on and pose for this on the website. Again, it's visually it's the same construct and identity as the magazine, but this is a group of people having fun and wanting to share in with that fun. So I have to go back. To move on to format, I mentioned magazines don't always have to be the same format. This is one of the most exciting formats I've seen in a long time. Real Review is an architecture magazine from London. It's long, tall and thin, as you can see. These are the first 5 issues. They're very, very similar in tone and visual character. But the clever part is it's long, tall and thin, but it opens out square. Now, this is a magazine. A lot of independent magazines are big, heavy, bookish, quite expensive to buy. They aren't all. And this one is one that isn't, because it uses relatively ordinary paper. But just because they've printed it on a square format and folded it, it becomes something completely different. It makes it special. The paper isn't special. Much of it isn't special in many ways, but that format just gives it an informality that allows you to run some quite heavy text. And bearing in mind, it's an architecture magazine, so it's about, in architecture in the broadest sense, I mean, it's about broader living. So it's living in cities, it's why are we all hooked on caffeine, it's living today, and then the interplay between life and architecture and the spaces and the cities, and the format itself reflects that perfectly in the way that you can, instead of having a double-page spread, you have a 4-page spread, and suddenly it frees up the whole visual on the page. Quality might seem a very obvious thing. We all strive for quality, but there's one magazine that I would put forward as striving more than others, and that is The Gourmand, another London magazine. It's a food magazine, as the name suggests, but it's food and culture, and everything it does in the best form it can do. Here we have a cover. We'll have a look at the shoot in a minute, but this cover, as I hope you can see, is based on recreating emoji in photography. So it's very difficult to actually show this because the print quality, everything about it is fantastic as a physical thing. And to then photograph it and put it up on these big screens, you will lose most of the sense of what I'm talking about. But from A to Z across the whole production process, so the commissioning of photography, illustration and writing, the making of the magazine. So in this case, they've worked with a number of very interesting typographers to create their own typography. They did a long project with Monotype about investigating their archives to dig up long-lost fonts from the history of modernism. But in this case, we're looking at a bespoke piece of typography. These photographs are amazing in real life. I'm not sure they look so great when they're put through the computer and ripped onto the screen, but these in real life look like they're kind of some sort of extraordinary 50s throwback, but they're shot for this magazine, very particular types of food, shot and styled in a very careful kind of technicolor way. But they're a stunning piece of photography, beautifully produced. Same with archive material that they dig up. They compose it and curate it perfectly. And then they do their own shoots. So in this case, the in real life emoji, which in this case, so for example, this page on the purple page is heavy gloss paper, and the left-hand introduction page is red, is a matte stock. So immediately we're missing something on these screens again. But that variation between the two papers, and then as we go through it, and then we move on to some black and white photography, and then great illustration as well, classic illustration with against a commissioned column. And again, there's glossy versus matte. I think you can see a little bit of that in the. I can see it on my screen here. The colour of the papers. I promised Conceptual, and this is one of my favourite magazines at the moment, is MacGuffin. For film fans, you might recognise that the name MacGuffin as the fake lead in a Hitchcock movie. And this does a similar thing. Each issue, they've just had their 5th issue. Each issue is about a thing. So they did the bed, they did the window, they did the rope, they did the sink, and this 5th issue is about the cabinet. And you might think, well, who's possibly going to be interested in a magazine just about cupboards and storage? I mean, okay, we can all spend time in the IKEA catalogue, but looking at a magazine for inspiration is something else. But the fact that it's about the cabinet is a MacGuffin. That's a false lead. What we actually have is a magazine that's about everything, because they use the object each time to research and explore and find all sorts of strange avenues to look at. So there are extraordinarily exotic cabinets from antiquity, but also we're looking at more modern cabinets. The early computer games were housed in cabinets, and so it allows us to talk about computer games. Adam Steck toured the world persuading people that own famous modernist iconic buildings persuading their owners to let him in and have a look at what the insides of these buildings. And he part of one of his projects was to go around looking for modernist cabinets. And so this is a story that reveals historical modernist examples of storage around the world that would not otherwise be known. Early museums and scholars built extraordinary display presentation units for their huge collections of items, whether it be they fossils or ancient pieces that they had found. And this is a look at how that influenced the early department stores and the way things were presented. So we're looking at how cabinets are used to display. And then we do meet IKEA, and we find out the history of the Billy bookcase. People who make their own cabinets using various devices. On the right-hand example here is some of the weirdly shaped pieces of polystyrene that come off your TVs or white goods when you buy them. And of course, we now have so much stuff in our houses, and yet we want to live this kind of modernist kind of empty space and declutter. So we rent storage spaces, and so there's a great set of pictures of the storage rooms in the big warehouses that I'm sure you must have here. We have them at home, yeah, right. And then beautiful photography of marquetry, the craftsmanship that went into making the great cabinets of the 18th, 19th century. And finally, my favourite example. They do this quite often. The idea of a weird art project. So we've had so many different it's about cabinets, but we've learnt about so many different areas of activity, and now we hit art, and we hit Yvonne Droog-Vendel, who was an artist who married a cabinet. It was a performance piece from, but again, it's just that's her with her beloved cabinet. So there's humour as well. I mentioned scheduling and getting magazines done. Well, it might seem quite perverse. I mean, a magazine about news launching now, or 7 years ago this was, it's been going for 7 years, delayed gratification. They specialise in slow journalism, and whereas most of us now get all our news headlines from Twitter or whichever social media thing we're following at that time, we know where we can get the headlines. We know we know the news. We know that's fine. We're on top of it. The last place we're going to look for, in theory, is a magazine. Although there's an addendum to that, which I'll come back to in a minute. But 7 years ago, a team in London launched Delayed Gratification, and they wanted to take advantage of print and the very fact that it was out of date. So it's a quarterly magazine. The current issue now looks at the quarter from October to December last year. So it deliberately looks back at a 3-month period 3 months ago and reconsiders what mattered in the news during that period. And so by having a distance, it can reevaluate what was important and what wasn't important. And in that way, they're slowing themselves down, they're slowing down the decision making, and they're making slow journalism, which allows a more definite, more just a better evaluation of what mattered rather than it just being bang, 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 bang. They also have a great line in infographics. This is their contents page, which again is divided between. So we've got the between short and long pieces going vertically, and between serious and frivolous going this way, and the stories are all positioned within that. And as you can see, so we start. This is a slightly older issue. It starts with April, and there was a big fight. And it's talking about the fight, but it's talking about this photograph of the fight, and there's a deeper tale there. There was a general election during this period, and this is an infographic that looks at the number of various issues, the relationship between various issues which were discussed by each of the major political parties, and presents them in colour. A more longer form story about the city of Mosul, which we know all sorts of horrific stories about, but this was the story about the zoo, which allows them to talk more generally about the whole situation through an interesting narrative around something completely removed from the day-to-day of the situation. I should add, just you can see on the left-hand side there's a column where it's just giving you little snippets as well. It's kind of like a better Twitter feed through the resolution of time. And here we've got, it was a London Marathon, and this is an assessment of the various outfits that people wore, rendered in graphic terms. And my favourite bit they do every time is the celebrity tree count, where they highlight some of the rubbish celebrity stories which a large amount of paper was wasted on in the last quarter, and measure it accordingly. So what we have here, I'm not sure if any of these people are going to. So yeah, you can see. Well, so the most extreme waste was Billy Fire's baby is often hungry. I'm afraid I don't even know who Billy Fire is, etc. But they're looking at their industry and mocking and making a serious point at the same time. And I should add, they also do, because they're so. They have a very committed readership. They're huge on subscriptions, and they've begun a series of infographics classes to try and spread their knowledge in that respect. If they're slow, then they must be fast. Fast magazines. Well, there's a long history of making zines and making them quickly and throwing them out. Mushpit is in reality anything but a fast magazine, in the sense that it's fast to make. They put the girls behind it, and the art team put an awful lot of effort into making this magazine, but the whole point of it is to look like it's been thrown together, like it's fast. So this is a magazine that mixes feminism and politics with reflecting the life of a 20-something young woman living in a big city, deluged with social media. Interestingly, they follow a lot. I mean, this front cover, despite the obvious points that I don't have to make, they are following a lot of the rules of front covers here. There's a lot of cover lines. They're dealing with numbers, the logos at the top. There is eye contact, even if it's not particularly attractive eye contact. But they have fun. This is a fun project that is just says it as it is, and it's just having dealing with life. So this is a personality test, one of the oldest traits in publishing, but done in their own way. Are you postman or postman? All sorts of stuff on the left. On the right, a fake ad, man camp. Rehabilitate your man who's unable to develop self-awareness. Are you tired of putting up with a fucking baby for a spouse? There goes the video. A look at a boy's apartment rendered using the latest video techniques, video rendering techniques. And so this is a fake boy's apartment and how to engage with it. Ridiculous infographics that take the mickey out of the entire form, and lots and lots of visual references to social media. In this case, Instagram stories. This is a fashion story, but it's been put across as if you were looking at it on your phone and Instagram stories. But it's underlying it all is a serious point, and this is a very serious piece about dating in the post-Weinstein world. But even then, they're still having fun, and this guy holding up this sign saying "Me Three," it just makes me laugh every time. Even, as much as I believe in the Me Too thing, I mean, we should be able to laugh at it at the surrounds to it as well. And again, one of the oldest tropes in publishing is this idea of identifying stereotypes and mocking them. And the closer you can get to your reader when you mock them, the better. And this is a case in point. Parameters. This is a bit of an odd title. I couldn't work out what to call this one. Migrant Journal is a fantastic magazine that has set itself. It's a bit of a blurry image, but this is because this doesn't actually exist. It's set itself a target. They're just going to, over 3 years, every 6 months, they're going to produce an issue, and they're halfway through their publishing program. They're going to make 6 issues, so this is a nominal idea of what the 6 spines will look like when they're piled up together, because the later 3, they've only got as far as issue 3 so far. And there it's made by a group of people that were very concerned about the narrative around migration in Europe, certainly, in the world. I mean, all sorts of areas, not just US, Mexico, but the Middle and Far East, all sorts of issues around migration. They wanted to address the ongoing story about how it's something that can be easily resolved, and all you have to do is get isolationist and you'll be safe. They're digging a lot deeper into that. They've never made a magazine before. They wanted to make a magazine, and this is it goes along with what Delayed Gratification are doing. They wanted to make a magazine because they felt that was the best way to create a series of items that were going to be archivable. So their market, as they want people to buy it, they want subscriptions, they want us, whoever's interested in their subject matter, to buy their magazine, but they want it to be in libraries and academic institutions and researchable in 10, 20, 30 years' time. So that set the bar in terms of the quality of their production values, but it also, interestingly, pulled them away from digital. They wanted to do it in print because they considered that that was something that would still be here in 20 or 30 years. It's a beautiful magazine, beautifully produced. There's a sheen on it that just about catches in these images. There's a sheen to the paper with special inks. Here, I think you can see the metallic ink on the left. It's very, as I hope I've already made clear, it's quite academic in its approach. For designers, it's a very interesting design, but it also works in a more fundamental, functional way. It's beautiful photography dealing with, in this case, globalization. The idea of drones and unmanned vehicles are beautifully explained and discussed using amazing infographics as well as the special links. Beautiful bespoke artworks, extraordinary map making. And then there's the need and the willingness to adapt. I mean, if something like Migrant Journal has set its tone, it's going to make 6 issues, then it will cease. And and you know, if you're going to do that, then you can't change midstream. That they've set their terms, they're going to see it through. Courier is a very interesting example of a magazine in London that started out as a free magazine. It's a business magazine. It's about startups. It's around the kind of East End, the area of London where there's a lot of shared workspaces, and it's for people that are sort of in the creative industries in the broadest sense, covering them and giving them advice and helping them and trying to build a community feeling around them. They started off as a free magazine, and they've recently relaunched in a slightly smaller format as a paid-for magazine. I think that's a very interesting example of how they didn't intend for that to happen, but they found as they went through their business journey, they found that they would get into a situation where they could begin to sell their magazine. In fact, we were one of the first people to sell it. It was being given out around coffees and bars, but they used our shop to test selling the free issue and try and sort of test the water. And it's now only available for sale. So here we have, it's a much more, in many ways, much more traditional format of magazine, but it's got some great illustration. You can get a sense of the kind of stories it's telling, and a lot of infographics dealing with in this case, the book industry, fashion, and advice. But you need to be able to change. And if we're talking about change, then what about something like this, where Buffalo Zine, I'm going to show you very briefly 4 issues. There's one on the top there. That's another issue. That's another issue. And we're going to look at this issue. But I'm going to go back on that because they're worth. Oh, I can't go back. Okay. So each one changes. They change the format and concept each time. The first one that I'm showing you here is it's a Victorian novel, children's novel. It's a hardback book with a dust jacket and everything, and it's formatted exactly as a children's Victorian novel. I should also explain this is a fashion magazine. So if a fashion magazine in your head brings to mind Vogue, or if you're in the indie scene, perhaps you might be thinking of the fashion pages of the Gentlewoman or whatever. It tends to be very serious and very proper. There's a way that you do fashion, and the fashion brands are very concerned about how they present themselves and expose themselves. The people behind this magazine have managed to jump over all those issues and create something which is the best magazine, the best fashion magazine out there. So this was a Victorian children's book. This was one of several issues at this time, which pastiche interiors, shelter magazines. And there was a stream of different front covers based on different types of interiors magazines. This, as some of you already gathered, is a mail order catalogue. And then this one wasn't really anything. It was just very big. And this is the one I want to look at, though, because this is a joy of publishing. This is, I mean, first of all, we've got, it's one of several covers, but we've got Pamela Anderson on the cover. So these are guys who are working with fashion at the high end. They get access to the best photographers, they get access to the celebrities, and then they get them to work with them on these kind of projects. This is the contents page. What we're looking at here is a very, very loose. In fact, there's contents on the left and credits on the right. But below there's a kind of collage, a montage of the street in which their office is in, and it's in one of the rougher streets of the East End of London. And there's some dead properties, some empty properties, and it's just sort of explaining, the various businesses that are involved in them. And we're treated to some archive photographs of that street. What they've done with this issue is they haven't pastiche another publishing entity. They decided they were just going to make a magazine about their office and do it all around their life and their office. And so they did a lot of research about the area, about the history of the buildings. They did a big interview with David Bailey, the photographer who was famous for doing a lot of photography around the East End, and reproduced some of the famous shots from the pubs of the 60s, 70s East End. And then they raided the archives of some of the businesses around them and got out lots of old invoices and letterheads and material. So you get a real sense of the business history of the area. They did shoots on the roof of the office, And here they're taking the mickey out of the idea of renting spaces and co-working spaces in somewhere like Shoreditch. Some weird stuff going on with some of the image making and some of the graffiti they found. They're absolutely biting the hand that's feeding them in terms of their fashion shoots and scrawling your brand here across the shirt. And then intermingled with all of this, there's historical material from various strikes and campaigns against government cuts in the area, and so they're absolutely sort of mixing in the fashion with the historical roots of the area in which they're based. You can see here, so there's the Hackney action, rents rise 90p, the battles begin. And down below you've got a model holding up a fire exit sign. And here is the office itself. And then we have more, and it's for me it's large format, and it's just really exciting. And there's a lot more fashion in there as well. I'm concentrating on the crazy parts. And then this is my favourite shoot in the lot. This is the poor intern, and it's a genuine fashion shoot. And this is her on the way back from the coffee shop. And my final example is called What? If that wasn't far enough, then so okay, we've got this. So Ordinary magazine is another favourite. So here we've got a magazine. Not only is it called Ordinary, which is not going to really kind of jump out at anyone. It's like well, there is a magazine called OK, but I mean, why would you call a magazine OK? Somebody did, but Ordinary. We all know about cover mounts and how we can in the summer it's no longer so simple, but you could certainly in the UK market you would cover mount a pair of flip flops or a paperback on the front cover of your magazine and watch it sell at the airport. In this case, this magazine cover mounts an object each time. In this case, it was 4 cotton buds, and then gives the cotton buds to a series of invited creatives and asks them to create an image using those cotton buds. They've done other things. They did knives and forks. Plastic cutlery was one issue. A washing up sponge was another issue. A sock. I'm looking forward. I should add. Well, let's have a look at it. So, look, there's 4 of them. That's how they look. And that's the only text is on the back cover where they list the people that made the images. And here are the images. Quite inventive, eh? And then, of course, at the end of it, the idea is that you take out the cotton buds and do your own image. So this is the one that we threw. When we reviewed it on the website, we took a photograph at the end and used it. I'm particularly looking forward to the next issue, which I'm expecting in I think next week or the week after, because apparently the object this time is air. There are 10 magazines. There are 10 magazines, all of which are doing something different. I've given you a reason why I selected each one, but the reality is you can almost select any of these for any of them, with some exceptions. Something like delayed gratification and the idea of slow journalism, to some degree, it applies to all these magazines. Certainly the Gentlewoman, the Gourmand, Migrant Journal, these all benefit from taking advantage of the production process that goes into making a magazine, doing it slowly, doing it properly, and making it the best that you can do. Some of these, as I say, are already very, very successful as businesses in their own right. I've only looked at 10 because I felt I should narrow it down, but if there's another presentation to be done with another 10. It's a lively, booming area. We have 450 different magazines in our shop, and that's a small portion of what's available out there. I encourage you to look at these magazines, and whilst I've tried to deliver a sort of talk that's as entertaining as it is, I hope, informative, there are some very, very serious points underlying these magazines, and there's very, very serious people making these magazines, however absurd some of them, the last one in particular, might be. So I'll end it there and say thank you again for inviting me, Suzanne, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you. Is that? Yeah. So okay. Cool.
Does the mic hear any questions for Jeremy?
It's a simple process. That we ask people to send us a copy of the magazine. That's the or there's an email address submission at magculture.com where you can send information and then we can follow up. The decision making process itself is simple in the sense. The shop's been around for just about 2.5 years now, but before that, 10 years before that, I launched the MagCulture website. So I've got used to looking at magazines and finding something quickly about them that I might want to write about, and that, in effect, is the selection process for the shop. I'm very realistic. I mean, the examples I've shown you today, I feel confident. That every aspect. I would defend every aspect of those magazines in terms of the way they look, the content. They're all up to scratch. But I'm realistic about, with 450 magazines, that some of them maybe aren't well designed as I think they could be, or they aren't well enough written as they could be, but they've got something that makes me think this is special. It might be great looking, but the content lets it down a little bit, or vice versa. It might simply be that it's an extraordinary format, and I think people will be interested to see that format. But it's the same criteria as if I want to write about something. If there's a story to tell about it. So if someone asks me, so why are you stocking that? I can say, because it's got that in it. Hi.
I'm just curious, of the magazines you showed, which ones are more hobbyist and which ones are...
Good question. Okay. I'll have to go back. Oh, I've gone too fast. So the ones which are clearly businesses and achieving. So the Gentlewoman. The Gentlewoman has a large fashion section. Is very successful in terms of fashion advertising. So it's doing phenomenally well in sales, and it's the place to be for the fashion world. Delayed gratification is doing really, really well because I said there was an addendum to that, didn't I? So why launch a news magazine now? Well, actually, I think we need news more than ever, and we're seeing it in our news weeklies, and from The Economist to The New Yorker, the sort of quality written magazines are in boom. Certainly in Europe, you can't get enough of them because there's so much poor coverage online or confusing coverage. So people are looking to trusted brands, and news is really big in print right now. So delayed gratification is. I mentioned subscriptions. They relaunched their subscription service just before Christmas and did a big promotion around that, and they completely were overwhelmed by the response. So they're moving into a very exciting stage where they're doing very well. The Gourmand does very well. Courier is on a business footing. The others are either something like Migrant isn't about. It's a six magazine publishing program that has a different end than a business, clearly. I think the others are all, one degree or another, are labours of love. Not to say, I know in particular something like Mushpit would love to be just, the girls that do that, Bertie and Shah, would love to be just making Mushpit, but one's a stylist and one's a writer in the fashion industry, and they have to earn a living in order to make the magazine. But it feeds itself, the two sides feed themselves. So it's probably, in this example, it's probably about, of the 10, four Gentlewoman, Gourmand, Delayed Gratification and Courier are on a secure financial footing. The rest are finding their way. Some of them are new enough they haven't actually had a chance to get there yet. Hi.
Hi, Jeremy. Thank you so much. Customers. What have you learned about people who want to come and buy magazines?
Okay, good. Well, It's interesting. I don't know if you have expectations in your head when you ask that question, but the thing, both in terms of the people that make the magazines, because one of the joys is that we meet a lot of the people, because when people first make one of these magazines, if they can, they'll come and drop them off, so you get to meet them. So the first thing is people making them generally are young, in their 20s or 30s. So it's not people like me living the good old times. There's a real hunger amongst the younger generation to make magazines. I know that's not what you asked, but on that side of it, there's that. But then in terms of the customers, it's everyone. I mean, I thought there would, I thought, okay, I'm gonna, we're in not a very busy area of London, but we're near the hip parts enough to. I imagine it would be quite, kind of a young, trendy crowd, and that would be it. There is that. There's a lot of art students and the people who you would expect to be interested. There's sort of people that are very like some of the people that make the magazines. But then we get families, we get older people, we get a lot of people from out. A lot of tourists come by. We've been featured in various, I don't know, guides or something. We get a lot of people from Tokyo come by. We're on some sort of tour guide thing or something. But it's people of all ages, men, women, all national. I mean, it's a complete mix. That's what's fascinating about it. It makes it quite. I mean, it's fascinating. I think it's healthy. It's slightly confusing because it makes it very hard to aim at something. It's everyone. Did you think it would be a certain type of person or no?
I'm quite gratified by that.
Mm-hmm.
That gives me hope.
But and then there are people that walk in and look around and say, "You sell magazines?"
No coffee, no candles.
Yes, yeah. These are books, right? No, they're magazines. Oh, they really struggle with the idea because they're so far down the prevailing narrative that I don't even want to say it. But they're surprised, yeah, pleasantly surprised.
Jeremy, thank you for joining us. I love how broad your definition of magazines is. There's room in. You've got a big tent. And
Absolutely,
room for everyone.
absolutely.
And I appreciate that. And thank you for all you do to promote print. That's
Thank you.
a good job. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you.